Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition. D&D 2E if you're in a hurry. I'm sure you all have your own reasons for being here, whether for clarification on the rules you currently use, curiosity for what once was, or disappointment in what currently is. Whatever the reason, I'm here to illuminate not just the rules and mechanics of the 2nd edition, but also the philosophy behind some of the decisions, or rather my interpretation of it, as well as try to share some of my appreciation at the sheer depth and passion put into the game during this time. I know that this material may not be so readily available as newer editions are, but it has quite the depth. If 5th edition is but a lake 2 feet deep, 2nd is a deep and plentiful well. I'll begin with the ever so important PHB, the Player's Handbook. Specifically, the revised version. While both are full of beautiful artwork, I have access to the revised version only. So let's open it up. So, as a disclaimer, there's most likely a lot of context I am missing due to the fact that, as you can probably tell, I was not born when this material was created. So I'm sure there's some old heads that will be glad to correct any mistakes I make. Alright, on to the foreword. A very lovely foreword from David Zeb Cook, January of 1989. I'll let you pause and read that for yourself. I'm not gonna. The real basics. Now you guys probably already know most of what I'm about to go through on this next part, but it's probably good to get a perspective of it from their time. This was groundbreaking stuff back then. This section is intended for novice role players. If you have played role-playing games before, don't be surprised if what you read here sounds familiar. Games come in a wide assortment of types: board games, card games, word games, pictures games, miniatures games. Even within those categories are subcategories. Board games, for example, can be divided into path games, real estate games, military simulation games, abstract strategy games, mystery games, and a host of others. Still, in all this mass of games, role-playing games are unique. They form a category all their own that doesn't overlap with any other category. For that reason, role-playing games are hard to describe. Comparisons don't work because there isn't anything similar to compare them to. At least not without stretching your imagination well beyond its limits. But then again, stretching your imagination is what role-playing is all about. So let's try an analogy. Imagine that you are playing a simple board game called Snakes and Ladders. Your goal is to get from the bottom to the top of the board before all the other players. Along the way are traps that can send you sliding back towards your starting point. There are also ladders that can let you jump ahead, closer to the finish space. So far, it's pretty simple and pretty standard. Now let's change a few things. Instead of a flat, featureless board with a path winding from side to side, let's have a maze. You are standing at the entrance, and you know that there's an exit somewhere, but you don't know where. You have to find it. Instead of snakes and ladders, we'll put in hidden doors and secret passages. Don't roll a die to see how far you move. You can move as far as you want. Move down the corridor to the intersection. You can turn left or right, or go straight ahead, or go back the way you came. Or, as long as you're here, you can look for a hidden door. If you find one, it will open into another stretch of corridor. That corridor might take you straight to the exit or lead you into a blind alley. The only way to find out is to step in and start walking. Of course, given enough time, eventually you'll find the exit. To keep the game interesting, let's put some other things in the maze with you. Nasty things. Things like vampire bats and hobgoblins and zombies and ogres. Of course, we'll give you a sword and a shield, so if you meet one of these things, you can defend yourself. You do know how to use a sword, don't you? And there are other players in the maze as well. They have swords and shields, too. How do you suppose another player would react if you chanced to meet? He might attack, but he also might offer to team up. After all, even an ogre might think twice about attacking two people carrying sharp swords and stout shields. Finally, let's put the board somewhere you can't see it. Let's give it to one of the players and make that player the referee. Instead of looking at the board, you listen to the referee as he describes what you can see from your position on the board. You tell the referee what you want to do, and he moves your piece accordingly. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of that scenario, but you get the gist. Back then, Snakes and Ladders was as close of a comparison as they had, I guess. No, I know that's not true. There was other games a little bit closer to D&D, but it's a nice comparison. Now, a lot of this is probably more stuff that you already know, but maybe you'll glean a new insight from it. The goal. Another major difference between role-playing games and other games is the ultimate goal. Everyone assumes that a game must have a beginning and an end, and that the end comes when someone wins. That doesn't apply to role-playing, because no one wins in a role-playing game. The point of playing is not to win, but to have fun and to socialize. An adventure usually has a goal of some sort. Protect the villagers from the monsters. Rescue the lost princess. Explore the ancient ruins. Typically, this goal can be attained in a reasonable playing time. 4 to 8 hours is standard. This might require the players to get together for 1, 2, or even 3 playing sessions to reach their goal and complete the adventure. But the game doesn't end when an adventure is finished. The same characters can go on new adventures. Such a series of adventures is called a campaign. Bet you didn't know that, did you? Remember, the point of an adventure is not to win, but to have fun while working toward a common goal. But the length of any particular adventure need not impose an artificial limit on the length of the game. The AD&D game embraces more than enough adventure to keep a group of characters occupied for years. This next section goes over dice and their shapes and how to read them. I'm sure you know all that, so I won't go over it. Alrighty. Now on to more important stuff. The ability scores. Now, 2nd edition has the same 6 abilities that you're familiar with, but what they do goes beyond a simple minus or a plus to a roll. Your method for generating your 6 stats is probably valid in 2nd edition if it is in 5th. I personally use 4d6, take the 3 highest. I'd like to point out a fun little section over here on method 1 of rolling up your character, which I'm sure a lot of older players probably swear by it, but I could never. Method 1. Roll 3 6-sided dice. The total shown on the dice is your character's strength ability score. Repeat this for Dex, Con, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma, in that order. This method gives a range of scores from 3 to 18, with most results in the 9 to 12 range. Only a few characters have high scores, 15 and above, so you should treasure these characters. If I have a character that doesn't have a 15 or higher, I'm going to be honest, I'm throwing him in the trash. You got yourself a peasant right there. Yeah, that guy's either tilling the fields, or he's fertilizer for the fields. No doubt about it. Let's start with everyone's favorite, strength. Strength measures a character's muscle, endurance, and stamina. This ability is the prime requisite of warriors, because they must be physically powerful in order to wear armor and wield heavy weapons. A fighter with a score of 16 or more in strength gains a 10% bonus to the experience points he earns. And that'll be a recurring theme for other stats as well, as you'll see. Furthermore, any warrior with a strength of 18 is entitled to roll percentile dice to determine exceptional strength. Exceptional strength improves the character's chance to hit an enemy, increases the damage he causes with each hit, increases the weight the character is able to carry without a penalty for encumbrance, if you use encumbrance. I personally don't, to be honest. And increases the character's ability to force open doors and similar portals. Yeah, encumbrance is just something I keep to a reasonable level with my players. Maybe I should do encumbrance. I'm sure my players will just be ecstatic about calculating all that shit. So, as you can see by our lovely little chart here, that strength has, well, a few different things that you probably are curious about. Firstly, strength has, between 18 and 19, a percentile section, as we just mentioned before. Now, this is for warriors only, and it gives you just a little boost for those warrior types versus all the other classes. And you'll notice that in comparison to 5th, there's a lot more bonuses to hit and damage rather than the number of attacks. Every class, I believe every class, has less attacks than they do in 5th. Alright, let's go through these categories. Hit probability. Adjustments are added or subtracted from the attack roll on 1d20 during combat. You know what a hit roll is. You know how that works. The second one, also pretty self-explanatory, is damage adjustment. Weight allowance is the weight in pounds, for all you Europeans, a character can carry without being encumbered. Encumbrance measures how a character's possessions hamper his movement. These weights are expressed in pounds, again for you Europeans. A character carrying up to the listed weight can move his full movement rate. Maximum press. This is the heaviest weight a character can pick up and lift over his head. A character cannot walk more than a few steps this way. No human or humanoid creature without exceptional strength can lift more than twice his body weight over his head. In 1987, the world record for lifting a weight overhead in a single move was 465 pounds. A heroic fighter with strength 1800, or 18100, can lift up to 480 pounds the same way, and he can hold it overhead for a longer time. So, that's just a base of reference. And they'll mention world records every now and then, which is pretty interesting, to be honest. Open doors indicates the character's chance to force open a heavy or stuck door. When a character tries to force a door open, roll a d20. If the result is equal to or less than the number listed, the door opens. A character can keep trying to open a door until it finally opens, but each attempt takes time and makes a lot of noise. Numbers in parentheses are the chances on 1d20 to open a locked, barred, or magically held door, but only one attempt per door can ever be made. If it fails, no further attempts by that character can succeed. Then we have the bend bars and lift gates stat. This states the character's percentage chance on a percentile die to bend normal soft iron bars, lift a vertical gate, also known as a portcullis, or perform a similar feat of enormous strength. When the character makes the attempt, roll percentile dice. If the number rolled is equal to or less than the number listed, the character bends the bar or lifts the gate. If the attempt fails, the character can never succeed at that task. A character can, however, try to bend the bars on a gate that he couldn't lift, and vice versa. Dexterity encompasses several physical attributes including hand-eye coordination, agility, reaction speed, reflexes, and balance. Dexterity affects a character's reaction to a threat or surprise, his accuracy with thrown weapons and bows, and his ability to dodge enemies' blows. It is the prime requisite of rogues and affects their professional skills. A rogue with a dexterity score of 16 or higher gains a 10% bonus to the experience points he earns. Yeah, so similar to strength, but for rogue characters. And as we'll learn in a minute, rogue is not a class in 2nd edition. And wizard is also not a class, fun fact. But we'll get to that in a minute. Reaction adjustment. This is a modifier to your surprise roll. Missile attack adjustment. A plus or minus to hit with throwing or other ranged weapons. Defensive adjustment is a modifier to your enemy's hit roll. The ever-important Constitution. You have your hit point adjustment. And as you've probably noticed with a lot of these stats, you need either in the upper teens or way in the single digits to really have a modifier for a lot of these things. There's a whole big gray area in the center where there's just no pluses or minuses. You're just some guy. But yeah, you need, as you can see, a 15 to get even a +1 to your hit points per level. The numbers in parentheses are for warrior type classes, and we'll get to class types and whatnot in a couple of chapters. System shock. That's your percentage chance to survive just horrendous things that happen to you in the game, to be honest. Petrification, polymorph, magical aging. huge, immense amounts of damage all at once. As you can see, it's usually pretty favorable, but yeah, there's always that slight chance that you just have a heart attack and die. Resurrection Survival is your chance to successfully return from the afterlife through raised dead or resurrection or any other means. And you can see that's also pretty favorable chances. Then you have an adjustment to your poison saving throw. And yeah, you're probably not going to have to worry about that one. As you can see, you need either a 2 or a 19. So yeah, that's probably not going to happen very often. And then the last section is regeneration. If you have a absolutely absurd con, you can regenerate hit points faster. But as you can see, that is also way up there on con. So you're probably not going to need to worry about that one either for quite a while. Intelligence, 16 or higher, wizards, the wizard character type, which is not the class, but a group of classes. Same with strength and dex. Get a 10% bonus to their experience. First off, you have number of languages. This is the max number of languages your character can learn. And it's also the number of bonus proficiency points you acquire. And we'll talk about proficiency points later on. Next is the max spell level you're able to cast. As you can see, if you're kind of a dumb shit wizard, which I don't know why you would be, if you're doing Peasant World maybe, then you can only cast 4th or 5th level spells. And then higher intelligence characters can cast all the way up to 9th. So that's something to keep in mind for multi-classed characters. Then you have your chance to learn spell. You don't just automatically put that shit in your spell book. There's a percentage chance to learn it based off your intelligence. And there's other modifiers that apply to this based off of whether you're a specialist of a certain school of spells. Then you have the maximum number of spells per spell level. So, for example, if you have 18 intelligence, you can have 18 spells at each spell level. Which is kind of bullshit, to be honest. And they even kind of know that. As you can see, it mentions it being an optional rule. Not that any rule isn't optional in this game, I guess, but something to keep in mind. And then lastly, you have immunity to illusions. So if you have an absurdly high intelligence for whatever reason, you gain immunity to illusions at 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and so on. Where you just don't fall for that shit anymore. And then wisdom. Likewise to the other stats, priest, character, class types with a 16 or higher gain that 10% bonus. First off, you have magical defense adjustment. So that gives either a plus or a minus to your saving throw versus mind-altering spells, beguiling, charm, fear, illusions, hypnosis, and so on. Then you have bonus spells. Now what does that mean? So bonus spells are more spells, but only for priest character types. Wizards do not get the bonus spells. Now why is that? Well, in 2nd edition, priests debatably have a weaker repertoire of spells compared to wizards. A lot less DPS. Or DPR, I guess. They have a lot less damaging spells, definitely. So for example, if you were 13 wisdom, you'd have a bonus 1st level spell slot. And they're cumulative. So if you're an 18 wisdom, you'd have 2 1st level, 2 2nd level, 1 3rd level, and 1 4th level spell slot as a bonus on top of your normal slots. And then if you get inhumanly wise, it just, yeah, you can read the chart for yourself. Then you have chance of spell failure. So this is a percentage chance that your god just denies whatever spell you're trying to cast. And you don't have to worry about this unless you have mediocre or worse wisdom which you probably only really need to worry about if you're a multi-class. Then you have your spell immunity, similar to intelligence at high enough levels, except these are slightly different. These are charms, fear spells, anything mind-altering. Hold person, rave enfeeblement, charm monster, you can read the list, yeah. And then charisma. Your first number here is your maximum number of henchmen. You can't just go into a village and pay every peasant 1 gold and have an army of however many and assemble a peasant railgun, or whatever these kids are doing nowadays. But no, it's the max number of henchmen you can have at one point. Second is your loyalty base. This is to do with morale, mostly. Certain situations in combat will have NPCs roll morale, and if they fail, they will run away. And then lastly, you have your reaction adjustment. And this is a modifier to a reaction chart that we will see later on. Alrighty, before we move on to the races in the PHB, let's talk about Wrath. Wrath is the example character given at the end of the ability scores chapter, and they kind of call me out, to be honest, whenever I said I wouldn't play a character with below 15s. So let's see what Wrath is all about. Now that you have finished creating the ability scores for your character, stop and take a look at them. What does all this mean? Suppose you decide to name your character Wrath, and you rolled the following ability scores for him. Yeesh. Yep. Those are scores. Wrath has strengths and weaknesses, but it is up to you to interpret what the numbers mean. Here are just 2 different ways these numbers could be interpreted. 1. Although Wrath is in good health, he's not very strong, because he's just plain lazy. He never wanted to exercise as a youth, and now it's too late. His low wisdom and charisma scores show that he lacks the common sense to apply himself properly, and projects a slothful, I'm not going to bother attitude, which tends to irritate others. Fortunately, Wrath's natural wit and dexterity keep him from being a total loss. Thus, you might play Wrath as an irritating, smart-alecky twerp, forever ducking just out of range of those who want to squash him. 2. Wrath has several good points. He has studied hard and practiced his manual skills. Unfortunately, his strength is low from a lack of exercise, all those hours spent reading books. Despite that, Wrath's health is still good. His low wisdom and charisma are a result of his lack of contact and involvement with people outside the realm of academics. Looking at the scores this way, you could play Wrath as a kindly, naive, and shy professorial type who's a good tinkerer, always fiddling with new ideas and inventions. Obviously, Wrath's ability scores, often called stats, are not the greatest in the world. Yet it is possible to turn these disappointing stats into a character who is both interesting and fun to play. Too often, players become obsessed with good stats. These players immediately give up on a character if he doesn't have a majority of above-average scores. There are even those who feel a character is hopeless if he does not have at least one ability of 17 or higher. Oopsies. Needless to say, these players would never consider playing a character with an ability score of 6 or 7. Listen. I like having low scores, but I also like having high scores. I like both. You can have both. I think they're pretty enjoyable. 6 con? Oh, dude, I'll play a fucking 6 con if I have, 18 dex and 17 until, I don't know. In truth, Wrath's survivability has a lot less to do with his ability scores than with your desire to roleplay him. If you give up on him, of course he won't survive. But if you take an interest in the character and roleplay him well, then even a character with the lowest possible scores can present a fun, challenging, and all-around exciting time. Does he have a charisma of 5? Why? Maybe he's got an ugly scar. His table manners could be atrocious. He might mean well, but always manage to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. Yeah, don't we all? He could be bluntly honest to the point of rudeness, something not likely to endear him to most people. His dexterity is a 3. Why? Is he naturally clumsy or blind as a bat? Don't give up on a character just because he has a low score. Instead, view it as an opportunity to roleplay, to create a unique and entertaining personality in the game. Not only will you have fun creating that personality, but other players and the DM will have fun reacting to him. So yeah, they definitely called me out on that one. Hopefully we'll see more of Wrath in the future chapters. Chapter 2, Player Character Races. Now, to set your expectations, it's a little thin compared to 5th, I'm going to be honest with you. Player Character Races. After creating your character's ability scores, you must select a player character race. This is not a race in the true sense of the word. Caucasian, Black, Asian, etc. I don't know if you can say that anymore. It is actually a fantasy species of your character. Human, elf, dwarf, gnome, half-elf, or halfling. Each race is different. Each possesses special powers and has different lists of classes to choose from. All 6 of the standard races are described in detail in this chapter. In many cases, broad statements are made concerning the race in general. Players are not bound by these generalities. For example, the statement that dwarves tend to be dour and taciturn does not mean that your character cannot be a jolly dwarf. It means that the garden variety dwarf is dour and taciturn. If player characters were just like everyone else, they wouldn't be adventurers. Make your character unique, and he'll be more fun to play. Couple things to unpack there. As you can see, there's not as many races to pick from in the PHP, but they did expand on that later in its own book, as well as a book for each of these races. Except for Gnome and Halfling, they squashed those into the same book. Now we come to a area of peculiarity for 2nd edition. Different races have different minimums and maximums for their stats. I'll let you look at the chart here for yourself. Now that's not too terribly extreme in my opinion, but this is the edition I am used to after all. You'll see that halflings do not get exceptional strength, so halfling fighters are at a distinct disadvantage compared to fighters of other races. But that's on purpose. Halflings are never meant to be good fighters, or at least not as well suited to being great warriors as other races are. Racial ability adjustments. So, as you can see, each of the standard PHB races, except for humans and half-elves, get a +1 and a -1 to 2 different stats. Dwarves are hardy and healthy, but may be hard to get along with. Elves are nimble, but are overall thin and weedy. Gnomes have a superior intellect, but their curiosity also makes them reckless. Halflings are also nimble, but they lack the strength of other races. And these modifiers are tacked on after the minimums and maximums from the previous chart. So you could have a dwarf with a 2 charisma and a 19 con if you really wanted to. Or you could have an elf with a 19 dexterity. And so on and so forth. You get the idea. As you are probably wondering, humans receive no bonuses. However, they receive no negatives either. And that's kind of the whole shtick of humans in this edition. They are just bog standard. But they do have certain things going for them, and we'll get to that later on. Particularly in the section of player classes. So, each of the demi-human races has a plethora of unique things about them, unique traits and abilities. So let's look at them. Let's start with the dwarves. Dwarves are short, stocky fellows, easily identified by their size and shape. They average 4 to 4.5 feet tall. They have ruddy cheeks, dark eyes, and dark hair. Dwarves generally live for 350 years. Dwarves tend to be dour and taciturn. Where have we heard that before? They are given to hard work and care little for most humor. They are strong and brave. They enjoy beer, ale, mead, and even stronger drink. Their chief love, however, is precious metal, particularly gold. They prize gems, of course, especially diamonds and opaque gems, except pearls, which they do not like. Dwarves like the earth and dislike the sea. Not overly fond of elves, they have a fierce hatred of orcs and goblins. Their short, stocky builds make them ill-suited for riding horses or other large mounts, although ponies present no difficulty. So they tend to be a trifle dubious and weary of these creatures. They are ill-disposed toward magic and have little talent for it, but revel in fighting, warcraft, and scientific arts such as engineering. Though dwarves are suspicious and avaricious, their courage and tenacity more than compensate for these shortcomings. Get it? Dwarves typically dwell in hilly or mountainous regions. They prefer life in the comforting gloom and solidness that is found underground. They have several special abilities that relate to their underground life, and they are noted for being particularly resistant to magics and poisons. A character of the dwarven race can be a cleric, a fighter, or a thief. He can also choose to be a fighter cleric or fighter thief. For living underground, dwarves have found it useful to learn the languages of several of their neighbors, both friendly and hostile. The initial languages a dwarf can learn are common, dwarf, gnome, goblin, kobold, orc, and any others your DM allows. The actual number of languages is limited by the intelligence of your player character, as we saw on the table before, or by the proficiency slots he allots to languages. I'd recommend using proficiency slots, I'm going to be honest. By nature, dwarves are non-magical and never use magical spells. Priest spells are allowed, however. This gives a bonus to dwarves' saving throws against attacks from magical wands, staves, rods, and spells. This bonus is numbers. You can read the table later. Similarly, dwarves have exceptional resistance to toxic substances. All dwarven characters make saving throws against poison with the same bonuses that they get against magical attacks. Also, because of their non-magical nature, however, dwarves have trouble using magical items. All magical items that are not specifically suited to the character's class have a 20% chance to malfunction when used by a dwarf. This check is made each time a dwarf uses a magical item. A malfunction affects only the current use. The item may work properly next time. For devices that are continually in operation, the check is made the first time the device is used during an encounter. If the check is passed, the device functions normally until it is turned off. Thus, a dwarf would have to check upon donning a robe of blending, but would not check again until he had taken the robe off and then put it on again. If a cursed item malfunctions, the character recognizes its cursed nature and can dispose of it. So it's actually quite useful in that regard. Malfunction applies to rods, staves, wands, rings, amulets, potions, horns, jewels, and all other magical items except weapons, shields, armor, gauntlets, and girdles. This penalty does not apply to dwarven clerics using priest items. In melee, dwarves add +1 to their dice rolls to hit orcs, half-orcs, goblins, and hobgoblins. When ogres, trolls, ogre magi, giants, or titans attack dwarves, these monsters must subtract 4 from their attack rolls because of the dwarves' small size and combat ability against these much larger creatures. Don't you like that? Bonuses from racism. Dwarven infravision enables them to see 60 feet in the dark. Oh, by the way, it's called infravision back then, not dark vision. Same concept, but it lets you know it's on the infrared spectrum. Because of their sturdy builds, dwarves add 1 to their initial constitution scores. Their dour and suspicious natures cause them to subtract 1 from their initial charisma scores. They really like the word dour, huh? So, what does it all really mean? Well, the most important part is that dwarves have a natural aversion to wizardly magics. This is so deeply ingrained in them that they cannot be a mage of any kind. They are completely locked out of that class. This is a common theme for demi-humans in 2nd edition, limited on class choices. And I think it's meant to highlight the human ability to adapt and learn and grow in comparison to the other races. I think it represents our sort of our free will, and humans can be anyone and do anything we set our mind to, I guess is what they're trying to say. We're more than just a free feat at level 1. Now, I won't go super into detail about the other demi-human races. I just wanted to use that as a example for sort of what all the demi-human races get. But I'll read the introduction for the other demi-human races so you can get an idea of what they were all about back then. They're pretty similar to how they are currently, though. Elves tend to be somewhat shorter and slimmer than normal humans. Their features are finely chiseled and delicate, and they speak in melodic tones. Although they appear fragile and weak, as a race they are quick and strong. Elves often live to be over 1,200 years old. Although long before this time they feel compelled to depart the realms of men and mortals. Where they go is uncertain, but it is an undeniable urge of their race. Elves are often considered frivolous and aloof. In fact, they are not, although humans often find their personalities impossible to fathom. They concern themselves with natural beauty, dancing and frolicking, playing and singing, unless necessity dictates otherwise. They are not fond of ships or mines, but enjoy growing things and gazing at the open sky. Even though elves tend toward haughtiness and arrogance at times, they regard their friends and associates as equals. They do not make friends easily, but a friend or enemy is never forgotten. They prefer to distance themselves from humans, have little love for dwarves, and hate the evil denizens of the woods. Their humor is clever, as are their songs and poetry. Elves are brave, but never foolhardy. They eat sparingly, they drink mead and wine, but seldom to excess. While they find well-wrought jewelry a pleasure to behold, they are not overly interested in money or gain. They find magic and swordplay, or any refined combat art, fascinating. If they have a weakness, it lies in these interests. There are 5 branches of the elven race, at least at this time there was. Aquatic, gray, high, wood, and dark. Elf player characters are always assumed to be of the most common type, high elves. Although a character can be another type of elf with the DM's permission, but the choice grants no additional powers, and that changes whenever the Elven book comes out, and it expands on a lot of that, but we'll get to that later. To the eye of outsiders, the differences between the groups are mostly cosmetic, but most elves maintain that there are important cultural differences between the various groups. Aquatic elves spend their lives beneath the waves and have adapted to these conditions. Gray elves are considered the most noble and serious-minded of this breed. High elves are the most common. Wood elves are considered to be wild, temperamental, and savage. All others hold that the subterranean dark elves are corrupt and evil, no longer part of the elven community. More racism! Anyway, I'll get into more of their abilities in their own video. Let's talk about the race that didn't get to be in Baldur's Gate 1 or 2. Kin to dwarves, gnomes are noticeably smaller than their distant cousins. Gnomes, as they proudly maintain, are also less rotund than dwarves. Their noses, however, are significantly larger. Most gnomes have dark tan or brown skin and white hair. A typical gnome lives for 350 years. Gnomes have lively and sly senses of humor, especially for practical jokes. They have a great love of living things and finely wrought items, particularly gems and jewelry. Gnomes love all sorts of precious stones and are masters of gem polishing and cutting. Gnomes prefer to live in areas of rocky, rolling hills, well wooded and uninhabited by humans. Their diminutive stature has made them suspicious of the larger races, humans and elves. Although they are not hostile, they are sly and furtive with those they do not know or trust, and somewhat reserved even under the best of circumstances. Dwelling in mines and burrows, they are sympathetic to dwarves, but find their cousins' aversion to surface dwellers foolish. And then they gain a bunch of bonuses similar to dwarves, and we'll get into those in their own video. Then we have half-elves. Half-elves are the most common mixed-race beings. The relationship between elf, human, and half-elf is defined as follows. 1. Anyone with both elven and human ancestors is either a human or a half-elf. Elves have only elven ancestors, 100% pure. If there are more human ancestors than elven, the person is human. If there are equal numbers or more elves, the person is half-elven. Half-elves are usually much like their elven parent in appearance. They are handsome folk, with the good features of each of their races. They mingle freely with either race, being only slightly taller than the average elf, and weighing about 150 pounds. They typically live about 160 years. They do not have the abilities of the elf, nor do they have the flexibility of unlimited level advancement of the human. Finally, in some of the less civilized nations, half-elves are viewed with suspicion and superstition. In general, a half-elf has the curiosity, inventiveness, and ambition of his human ancestors, and the refined senses, love of nature, and the artistic tastes of his elven ancestors. Half-elves do not form communities among themselves. Rather, they can be found living in both elven and human communities. The reactions of humans and elves to half-elves ranges from intrigued fascination to outright bigotry. More racism! And then they go on to explain their abilities that are similar yet lesser than a full elf. But we'll cover that in the elf video. Halflings are short, generally plump people, very much like humans. Their faces are round and broad and often quite florid. Their hair is typically curly, and the tops of their feet are covered with coarse hair. They prefer not to wear shoes whenever possible. Their typical life expectancy is approximately 150 years. Halflings are sturdy and industrious, generally quiet and peaceful. Overall, they prefer the comforts of home to dangerous adventuring. They enjoy good living, rough humor, and homespun stories. Halflings are not forward, but they are observant and conversational if in friendly company. Halflings see wealth only as a means of gaining creature comforts, which they love. Although they are not overly brave or ambitious, they are generally honest and hard-working when there is need. Halfling homes are well-furnished burrows, although most of their work is done on the surface. Elves generally like them in a patronizing sort of way. Dwarves cheerfully tolerate them, thinking halflings somewhat soft and harmless. Gnomes, although they drink more and eat less, like halflings best, feeling them kindred spirits. Because halflings are more open and outgoing than any of these other three, they get along with other races far better. There are 3 types of halflings: harefeets, tall fellows, and stouts. Harefeets are the most common type, but for player characters, any of the 3 is acceptable. And we'll talk more about all of those types and probably more in their own video. And lastly, a small note about humans. Although humans are treated as a single race in the AD&D game, they come in all the varieties we know on Earth. A human PC can have whatever racial characteristics the DM allows. Humans have only one special ability. They can be of any character class and rise to any level in any class. Other PC races have limited choices in these areas. Humans are also more social and tolerant than most other races, accepting the company of elves, dwarves, and the like with noticeably less complaint. Because of these abilities and tendencies, humans have become significant powers within the world and often rule empires that other races, because of their racial tendencies, would find difficult to manage. So there you go. Humans are just chill guys. At the end of the race chapter, we're met with these tables regarding age, height, and weight for the various races, which is it's pretty interesting. You can see the base amounts and the modifiers that they recommend, as well as the recommended starting age for various races, and how long they generally live. And you can see at the bottom here that there's modifiers as your character ages, where they have weaker physical stats and better mental stats. We also get to have a few more world records. Let's take a look at them. The tallest man on record stood 8 feet 11.1 inches, while the tallest woman was 8 feet 1 1/4 inches. The shortest man was only 26.5 inches tall, and the shortest woman bettered this by only 24 inches in height. While the lightest humans are also among the shortest, the heaviest man weighed an estimated 1,400 pounds and stood only 6 foot 1. The heaviest woman is thought to have weighed 880 pounds. Obviously, these figures indicate that there's a great deal of variety possible for player characters. Now, I'm not entirely certain on the validity of 80s world records, but that's interesting anyway. Another one over here. Although many people have claimed to live to great ages, the oldest human of verifiable age was 113 years old in 1988, and still living at the time of this writing. I think that person might be dead by now. Maybe. But yeah, I think these tables are pretty useful and interesting, and they expand on them a little bit more in the books regarding each race individually. We'll have a look at those at some point. Chapter 3, debatably the most important chapter of the book. In second edition, the classes available are grouped into four, actually five, but we'll get to that later, groups. You have warriors, which consists of fighter, ranger, and paladin. These are your more martial classes characterized by higher damage and hit points. These classes use a D10 for hit points and have the best Thaco. What is Thaco, you ask? Well, let's have a little detour into the combat section. Thaco stands for To Hit Armor Class 0. Every class starts at 20, and this number decreases after so many levels depending on your class group. Looking at the chart, we can see that warriors decrease at a rate of 1 per level. Priests decrease at a rate of 2 every 3 levels. Rogues decrease at 1 every 2 levels. And lastly, we have wizards at just 1 every 3 levels. So how does it work exactly? Well, the easiest way, in my opinion, to look at it is that your Thaco is a target number, and your enemy's AC is a modifier. Pretty backwards to 5e, I know, but stick with me here. So if your Thaco is 20, and your enemy is at a naked AC of 10, then you need only roll a 10 on your d20 to hit. 10 plus 10. Same as 5e, roll a 10 to hit a 10. Now the brain melter for some players is that a lower AC is better. And here's how that works. If your opponent, let's say an ogre with an armor class of 4, then you would need a 16 on your d20. 16 plus the armor class of 4. Of course, you will have plenty of other modifiers from your magic weapons and strength and spells, and you get the gist of it. What I appreciate most about this system is that it gives an advantage to martial characters in martial combat, without a need to give these characters a ludicrous amount of attack rolls. Anyway, back to the class groups. Next we have Wizard, which contains mage and specialists of spell schools. To start unpacking that, we'll start with the fact that Wizard is not actually a class in 2nd edition. Use that for some D&D trivia. Secondly, you are not required to specialize in a school of magic, the exact benefits of which I will cover in later detail in their own class video. These classes use a D4 for hit points. You heard me right. They get that little pyramid that you never use for their hit points. If you thought they were paper mache before, not to mention, if you remember our look at Constitution, non-warriors are limited to a +2 hit points per level. So, your mage is starting at 6 hit points maximum at level 1. Now you may be thinking, oh golly gee, Greymore, that fucking sucks. Well, it fucking does. But to be honest, wizard types are absolute monsters at higher levels. They are the definition of glass cannon. It's their glass railgun, to be honest. Remember when we mentioned those bonus spells from your wisdom score? There's a reason wizards don't get those. There is some truly heinous shit they can do. But I'll cover that more in the magic chapter towards the end. Next you have Priest, consisting primarily of Cleric and Druid. They use a D8 for hit points and share the same number of spell slots. Nothing too terribly strange about them. They pretty much work how you think they would. Lastly, for now, is Rogue, another oddity of 2nd edition, at least if you're coming from 5th. Rogue is not a class in 2nd edition either. Instead, what you may know as Rogue is the Thief class. This group also encompasses the Bard. And they share a D6 hit points. As you can see, many classes are going to have less HP than you may be used to. Characters are a bit less superhuman in 2nd edition. More reliant on teamwork and strategy and magic items. Now you may be a little curious about a couple classes that are missing from this roster. Rest assured, Barbarian, Monk, Artificer, and quite a few others were added in later expansions. albeit slightly different than how you probably know them. Worry not, we will get to them eventually. Because you better believe they also got their own books. I won't go into excruciating detail on each class here. As I've mentioned before, they'll each receive their own video later on each individual class. I'll just give you a general sense of what makes each class unique. Firstly, we are given a chart on class ability minimums. Here we see that the basic classes, as they are often called in this book, require a 9 in their most important stat. Strength for fighter, intelligence for mage, wisdom for cleric, and dex for thief. Outside those, we can see that the other classes are considered optional. These were once oddities for classes, rare to some players, and maybe even disallowed to others. Of course, nowadays we hold Bard, Ranger, etc. as staples of the game. While not difficult to attain the roles needed to make these characters, it is certainly a little more demanding than the basic classes. Except Paladin. Charisma 17 can be a bit of a sacrifice. But that's sort of the point, I guess. Let's start with the Humble Fighter. You need a strength of 9. Prime requisite is strength, which is what you need for that 10% XP boost if you have 16 or more that we talked about before. And races allowed, all. Again, some races are locked out of certain classes. When we get to the deep dive on each class in their own video, I'll go over some amendments they actually make to these when those books come out. Something else to note is alignment restrictions. Some classes are restricted on alignments as well as race. Second edition puts a lot more stake into alignment than you may expect. Fighters, however, can be of any alignment. Pretty much anyone can pick up a sword and go to town. Next, we are greeted by this chart here. XP, hit die, and attacks per round. So let's unpack that. As you can see, in 2nd edition, different classes level up at different XP intervals. You can see here that Paladin and Ranger level up slightly slower than Fighter, as well as hit die having a maximum of 9 for these warrior classes, after which you gain only 3 hit points per level, regardless of your constitution score. This is one of those things I mentioned earlier about player characters being less superhuman, while still having an obscene amount of hit points compared to NPCs. You do in fact hit a soft ceiling when it comes to hit points. At the bottom, here we see that the attacks gained by warrior types are a little bit lower than what you might be used to. 3-2, meaning 1.5 attacks per round. Functionally, 3 attacks every 2 rounds. The way that works is you get 1 on the first, 2 on the second, and alternating until whatever you're fighting is dead. So, what makes a fighter a fighter? Let's take a look. The fighter is a warrior, an expert in weapons, and, if he is clever, tactics and strategy. There are many famous fighters from legend: Hercules, Perseus, Hiawatha, Beowulf, Siegfried, and others. You can read the list. A visit to your local library can uncover many heroic fighters. Remember libraries? Anyway. As a master of weapons, the fighter is the only character able to have weapon specialization. Weapon specialization enables the fighter to use a particular weapon with exceptional skill, improving his chances to hit and cause damage with that weapon. A fighter character is not required to specialize in a weapon. The choice is up to the player. No other character class, not even Ranger or Paladin, is allowed weapon specialization. Specifically, it adds +1 to hit, +2 to damage, and puts you 1 spot higher on the attacks chart. 1 to 6 is 3/2, 7 to 12 is 2 attacks a round, and 13 plus is 5/2, or 2 attacks and then 3 attacks. You get the idea. I'd like to take the opportunity to go over this section here on name level. This is the level in which your character becomes famous enough to attract followers and henchmen. When a fighter attains 9th level, he becomes a lord, he can automatically attract men-at-arms. These soldiers, having heard of the fighter, come for the chance to gain fame, adventure, and cash. They are loyal as long as they are well treated, successful, and paid well. Abusive treatment or a disastrous campaign can lead to grumbling, desertion, and possibly mutiny. To attract the men, the fighter must have a castle or stronghold and sizable manor grounds around it. As he claims and rules this land, soldiers journey to his domain, thereby increasing his power. Furthermore, the fighter can tax and develop these lands, gaining a steady income for them. Your DM has information about gaining and running a barony. And most of the other classes have a similar system whenever you get to or close to double digits in levels. The Paladin. Prime requisite, strength and charisma. Humans only. Don't worry too much about that. There is ways to mimic the types of characters you may want to run for demi-human paladins. But we'll get to that later. Paladins don't mess around in 2nd edition. If you fuck up, you're a fighter. If you do any evil or chaotic act, your god tells you to go fuck yourself. But we'll get into all the requirements and abilities that they have in their own video. Something I do want to mention here. Spells are also a minor part of the Paladin class. As you can see by the chart, they don't get spells until 9th level. This is a pattern for all classes in comparison to 5th, to be honest. Less spell slots just across the board. The Ranger. Prime stats, strength, dex, and wisdom. The fucking XP bonus hat trick. Humans, elves, and half-elves. And again, they expand on that later on. So don't have a conniption fit about it. Their abilities are fairly straightforward. Bonuses to animal handling, tracking, and they have access to, more druid-adjacent spells. But not until 8th level, of course. They also have these 2 little abilities here on the chart. Hide in shadows and move silently. Don't be heard and don't be seen on a D100. Pretty simple. Again, I'll go into more detail on them in their own video. A lot of the other classes work more or less how you would expect them to, so I'll kind of gloss over them here until we go into their own videos. Something to note that I always found sort of amusing. The Bard actually receives no spell slots at level 1. Until you reach level 2, you're kind of just some guy. Multiclassing and dual classing. Multiclassing works a bit differently back in the day. It is for non-humans only. Humans have a separate system. That's what the dual classing is. Multiclassing is chosen when your character is created, and your options to do so are determined by your race, as shown here. Again, some of these are expanded later on. The fighter-cleric combo is your best substitute for a paladin type of character for demi-humans. The way it works is that you actually split your XP gained evenly among your classes. A 3rd level fighter and a 3rd level cleric is not a 6th level character. He is a 3rd level fighter cleric. When gaining hit points, you roll your appropriate die or dice and half it, or into thirds if you're doing a tri-class, as well as dividing your con bonus appropriately. Dual classing is an interesting concept that again highlights the human spirit to adapt and overcome. At any point in the character's life beyond level 1, he may restart at 0 XP, level 1, in a new class, provided that he has a 17 in the prime requisite. He then gains levels in his new class, keeping only his hit points, and once he surpasses the level of his old class, then He gains the abilities of both classes simultaneously. So that's an interesting ability, specifically for humans. It makes humans stand out. It shows that humans aren't really as stuck in their ways as the demi-humans are made out to be. Now, there are actually some exceptions to this, notably for some of the priests of certain gods. An example being the war god Ares. His priests are actually able to multi-class as a human into fighter cleric. But we'll get more into that later on. Chapter 4, Alignment. Alignment is quite an elusive concept to pin down. I know some groups who have ditched the concept entirely. Whatever your feelings on the matter may be, second edition, it tends to matter for quite a few enemies and spells and items. So it's definitely necessary. But let's see what the old masters had to say about that. After all other steps towards creating a character have been completed, the player must choose an alignment for the character. In some cases, especially the paladin, the choice of alignment may be limited. The character's alignment is a guide to his basic moral and ethical attitudes towards others, society, good, evil, and the forces of the universe in general. Use the chosen alignment as a guide to provide a clearer idea of how the character will handle moral dilemmas. Always consider alignment as a tool, not a straitjacket that restricts the character. Although alignment defines general attitudes, it certainly doesn't prevent a character from changing his beliefs, acting irrationally, or behaving out of character. Alignment is divided into two sets of attitudes, order and chaos, and good and evil. By combining the different variations with the two sets, 9 distinct alignments are created. These 9 alignments serve well to define the attitudes of most of the people in the world. Law, neutrality, and chaos. Attitudes towards order and chaos are divided into 3 opposing beliefs. Picture these beliefs as the points of a triangle, all pulling away from each other. The 3 beliefs are law, chaos, and neutrality. One of these represents each character's ethos, his understanding of society and relationships. Characters who believe in law maintain that order, organization, and society are important, indeed vital, forces of the universe. This relationship between people and governments exists naturally. Lawful philosophers maintain that this order is not created by man, but is a natural law of the universe. Although man does not create orderly structures, it is his obligation to function within them, lest the fabric of everything crumble. For less philosophical types, lawfulness manifests itself in the belief that laws should be made and followed, if only to have understandable rules for society. People should not pursue personal vendettas, for example, but should present their claims to the proper authorities. Strength comes through unity of action, as can be seen in guilds, empires, and powerful churches. Those espousing neutrality tend to take a more balanced view of things. They hold that for every force in the universe, there is an opposite force somewhere. Where there is lawfulness, there is also chaos. Where there is neutrality, there is also partisanship. The same is true of good and evil, life and death. What is important is that all these forces remain in balance with each other. If one factor becomes ascendant over its opposite, the universe becomes unbalanced. If enough of these polarities go out of balance, the fabric of reality could pull itself apart. For example, if death became ascendant over life, the universe would become a barren wasteland. Philosophers of neutrality not only presuppose the existence of opposites, but they also theorize that the universe could vanish should one opposite completely destroy the other, since nothing can exist without its opposite. Fortunately for these philosophers, and all sentient life, the universe seems to be efficient at regulating itself. Only when a powerful, unbalancing force appears, which almost never happens, need the defenders of neutrality become seriously concerned. The believers in chaos hold that there is no preordained order or careful balance of forces in the universe. Instead, they see the universe as a collection of things and events, some related to each other and others completely independent. They tend to hold that individual actions account for the differences in things and that events in one area do not alter the fabric of the universe halfway across the galaxy. Chaotic philosophers believe in the power of the individual over his own destiny, and are fond of anarchistic nations. Being more pragmatic, non-philosophers recognize the function of society in protecting their individual rights. Chaotics can be hard to govern as a group, since they place their own needs and desires above those of society. Good, neutrality, and evil. Like Law and Order, the second set of attitudes is also divided into 3 parts. These parts describe, more or less, a character's moral outlook. They are his internal guideposts to what is right or wrong. Good characters are just that. They try to be honest, charitable, and forthright. People are not perfect, however, so few are good all the time. There are always occasional failings and weaknesses. A good person, however, worries about his errors and normally tries to correct any damage done. Remember, however, that goodness has no absolute values. Although many things are commonly accepted as good, helping those in need, protecting the weak, different cultures impose their own interpretations of what is good and what is evil. Those with a neutral moral stance often refrain from passing judgment on anything. They do not classify people, things, or events as good or evil. What is, is. In some cases, this is because the creature lacks the capacity to make a moral judgment. Animals fall into this category. Few normal creatures do anything for good or evil reasons. They kill because they are hungry or threatened. They sleep where they find shelter. They do not worry about the moral consequences of their actions. Their actions are instinctive. Evil is the antithesis of good and appears in many ways, some overt and others quite subtle. Only a few people of evil nature actively seek to cause harm or destruction. Most simply do not recognize that what they do is destructive or disruptive. People and things that obstruct the evil character's plans are mere hindrances that must be overcome. If someone is harmed in the process, well, that's too bad. Remember that evil, like good, is interpreted differently in different societies. Alignment combinations. 9 different alignments result from combining these 2 sets. Each alignment varies from all others, sometimes in broad, obvious ways, and sometimes in subtle ways. Each alignment is described in the following paragraphs. Lawful good. Characters of this alignment believe that an orderly, strong society with a well-organized government can work to make life better for the majority of the people. To ensure the quality of life, laws must be created and obeyed. When people respect the laws and try to help one another, society as a whole prospers. Therefore, lawful good characters strive for those things that will bring the greatest benefit to the most people and cause the least harm. An honest and hard-working serf, a kindly and wise king, or a stern but forthright minister of justice are all examples of lawful good people. Lawful neutral. Order and organization are of paramount importance to characters of this alignment. They believe in a strong, well-ordered government, whether that government is a tyranny or benevolent democracy. The benefits of organization and regimentation outweigh any moral questions raised by their actions. An inquisitor determined to ferret out traitors at any cost, or a soldier who never questions his orders, are good examples of lawful neutral behavior. Lawful evil. These characters believe in using society and its laws to benefit themselves. Structure and organization elevate those who deserve to rule, as well as provide a clearly defined hierarchy between master and servant. To this end, lawful evil characters support laws and societies that protect their own concerns. If someone is hurt or suffers because of a law that benefits lawful evil characters, too bad. Lawful evil characters obey laws out of fear of punishment. Because they may be forced to honor an unfavorable contract or oath they have made, lawful evil characters are usually very careful about giving their word. Once given, they break their word only if they can find a way to do it legally, within the laws of the society. An iron-fisted tyrant and a devious, greedy merchant are examples of lawful evil beings. Neutral good. These characters believe that a balance of forces is important, but that the concerns of law and chaos do not moderate the need for good. Since the universe is vast and contains many creatures striving for different goals, a determined pursuit of good will not upset the balance. It may even maintain it. If fostering good means supporting organized society, then that is what must be done. If good can only come about through the overthrow of existing social order, so be it. Social structure itself has no innate value to them. A baron who violates the orders of his king to destroy something he sees as evil is an example of a neutral good character. True neutral. True neutral characters believe in the ultimate balance of forces, and they refuse to see actions as either good or evil. Since the majority of people in the world make judgments, true neutral characters are extremely rare. True neutrals do their best to avoid siding with the forces of either good or evil, law or chaos. It is their duty to see that all of these forces remain in balanced contention. True neutral characters sometimes find themselves forced into rather peculiar alliances. To a great extent, they are compelled to side with the underdog in any given situation. Sometimes even changing sides as the previous loser becomes the winner. A true neutral druid might join the local barony to put down a tribe of evil gnolls, only to drop out or switch sides when the gnolls were brought to the brink of destruction. He would seek to prevent either side from becoming too powerful. Clearly, there are very few true neutral characters in the world. Neutral evil. Neutral evil characters are primarily concerned with themselves and their own advancement. They have no particular objection to working with others, or, for that matter, going it on their own. Their only interest is in getting ahead. If there is a quick and easy way to gain a profit, whether it be legal, questionable, or obviously illegal, they take advantage of it. Although neutral evil characters do not have the every man for himself attitude of chaotic characters, they have no qualms about betraying their friends and companions for personal gain. They typically base their allegiance on power and money, which makes them quite receptive to bribes. An unscrupulous mercenary, a common thief, and a double-crossing informer who betrays people to the authorities to protect and advance himself are typical examples of neutral evil characters. Chaotic good. Chaotic good characters are strong individualists marked by a streak of kindness and benevolence. They believe in all the virtues of goodness and right, but they have little use for laws and regulations. They have no use for people who try to push folk around and tell them what to do. Their actions are guided by their own moral compass, which, although good, may not always be in perfect agreement with the rest of society. A brave frontiersman forever moving on as settlers follow in his wake is an example of a chaotic good character. Chaotic neutral. Chaotic neutral characters believe that there is no order to anything, including their own actions. With this as a guiding principle, they tend to follow whatever whim strikes them at the moment. Good and evil are irrelevant when making a decision. Chaotic neutral characters are extremely difficult to deal with. Such characters have been known to cheerfully and for no apparent purpose gamble away everything they have on the roll of a single die. They are almost totally unreliable. In fact, the only reliable thing about them is that they cannot be relied upon. This alignment is perhaps the most difficult to play. Lunatics and madmen tend toward the chaotic neutral behavior. Chaotic evil. These characters are the bane of all that is good or organized. Chaotic evil characters are motivated by the desire for personal gain and pleasure. They see absolutely nothing wrong with taking whatever they want by whatever means. Laws and governments are the tools of weaklings unable to fend for themselves. The strong have the right to take whatever they want, and the weak are there to be exploited. When chaotic evil characters band together, they are not motivated by a desire to cooperate, but rather to oppose powerful enemies. Such a group can be held together only by a strong leader capable of bullying his underlings into obedience. Since leadership is based on raw power, a leader is likely to be replaced at the first sign of weakness by anyone who can take his position away from him by any method. Bloodthirsty buccaneers and monsters of low intelligence are fine examples of chaotic evil personalities. And lastly, non-aligned creatures. In addition to the alignments above, some things, particularly unintelligent monsters and animals, never bother with moral and ethical concerns. For these creatures, alignment is simply not applicable. A dog, even a well-trained one, is neither good nor evil, lawful nor chaotic. It is simply a dog. For these creatures, alignment is always depicted as neutral. Chapter 5. Proficiencies. Optional. Whole optional chapter here. How about that? I'd recommend using them, though, to be honest. Proficiency slots are your character's skill set, I'd say. They are separated into weapon proficiencies and non-weapon proficiencies. We'll start with weapon proficiencies. So you got the chart here showing the different class groups, and you'll have your initial amount of proficiency points available, and the levels at which you get more. Warriors at every 3rd level, priests and rogues every 4th, and wizards every 6th level. The penalty section here is a negative to hit for not being proficient with a given weapon. So as you can see, if you're a fighter and you are proficient with swords and the like, and you pick up a mace, you're at a -2 to hit, which isn't too terrible. But if you're a wizard and you pick up a 2-handed sword, you're going to have a -5 to hit, which is a little more of a beating. So the way that works is you can spend 1 point on one weapon. So a fighter could spend 1 point on longsword, a point on longbow, another point on maces, and the 4th slot to specialize in longsword. Adding in a 2nd point lets you specialize in a given weapon, but only for fighters, of course. And the weapons and armor available to each class I'll get into in their own separate videos. Down here we have the chart for specialist attacks per round, for whenever a fighter specializes in different weapons. Melee weapons are what I explained earlier, but you also have the 2 types of crossbows and various throwing weapons. Then we have non-weapon proficiencies, which has a similar chart up here. Wizards and priests having 4 to start with, and warriors and rogues having 3. And everyone getting another one every 3rd level, except for rogues. And you get a bonus number of these equal to the number we discussed earlier in the intelligence section. And what do you spend these on exactly? Well, we have a whole big chart here on various skills and how many slots they take, what stat they go off of, and how difficult they are. So let's take direction sense, for example. You would roll off of your wisdom, which basically means you roll your wisdom or less. So the higher your wisdom, the easier it is. And you get a +1. So if you're a priest with direction sense and an 18 wisdom, you would then need to roll a 19 or lower to succeed in that skill. Pretty straightforward. These are the precursor to various skills in 5th edition. Sleight of hand, insight, athletics, stuff like that. And you can see they're broken up into the various classes, as well as a general section. And over here, we have a chart showing which classes can take which proficiency groups. I'll let you read that on your own. Now, I'm not going to go into every single one of these proficiencies, because we would be here for a while. But I will go over healing specifically. So healing, what it does, is it increases your party's healing rate whenever you take a long rest. It doubles it, actually, to 2. Yeah. Whenever you have a long rest in 2nd edition, you get a single hit point back. If you have healing, you get 2 back. And if you have healing and herbalism, you can heal at a rate of 3 hit points. This also allows for minor healing, first aid, if you would, for a D3 hit points. So yeah, long rest, you don't get all your hit points back. You heal at a normal human rate. They really like to remind you that you are indeed mortal. Money and equipment. Nothing too terribly out of the ordinary here. Just a big list of shit for you to spend some money on. Clothing, food, transport, animals. You want to buy a partridge? You can buy a partridge. Services such as baths, leeching, a city guide, someone to do your laundry, just really anything you can think of. Everything from a galleon to a sewing needle. Now for weapons and armor, I'll let you read the chart for yourself on armor classes for the different armors. As we said before, lower armor class is better. And there's more armor types than that, but I'll get into those in the arms and equipment book in a later video to go over all the different types of armor and their makeup, and some of the more exotic weapons as well. In the PHB, however, you do have quite a selection of weapons to choose from. Some stuff to point out is, holy shit, there's a lot of pole arms. You like pole arms? Pick a fucking pole arm. But anyway, weapon stats. You got the cost, how much it weighs, the size of the weapon. Weapons that are the size of your character. So, for example, if you're a human and you're medium-sized, you can wield a medium or smaller-sized weapon with a single hand. If the weapon is a larger size than you, for example, a halberd is a large or a two-handed sword, then you will need to use both hands to wield it. You have your damage type. There's piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning. You're probably familiar with those. Then we have speed factor. Different weapons function at different speeds. For example, if you have a two-handed sword, big and slow, it has a speed of 10. If you have a dagger, it has a speed of 2. And the way that works is for initiative, lower is better rather than higher. Another thing that's the reverse of 5th edition. But you add your speed to your initiative. And lower being better means that dagger with a 2 is faster than your two-handed sword with a speed of 10. And there's other modifiers for that as well that we can get into later in the arms and equipment guide. Lastly, you have your damage section for your weapons. Now you'll see that there's 2 numbers for damage on these weapons. The first one on the left is for medium and smaller size targets. The one on the right is for large category and bigger. So for example, if you have a longsword and you're fighting a human or a gnome or a halfling or so on, you do a d8 damage. If you're fighting an ogre or a giant or something of that nature, then you do a d12 damage. Some things to note, mostly on pole arms, some of them receive double damage when firmly set to receive a charge. So that's something you can elect to do on your turn, is prepare yourself for a charging enemy, and you will do double damage to them. Similarly, the lances will do double damage when used from the back of a charging mount. Makes those knight builds just that much more fun. And then at the bottom here we have missile weapon ranges and their rates of fire. 2 things to note. Heavy crossbow and the arquebus actually have a rate of fire less than 1. So what does that mean? Well, the heavy crossbow has 1/2, which means you get half an attack a round, or otherwise you shoot, reload on the next round, shoot on the round after that, and so on. The arquebus, 1/3, means you shoot, spend 2 rounds reloading, and then you're able to fire again. So I think that's a pretty accurate representation of the reload speed of these early firearms. And then you have your ranges given in yards, short, medium, and long. Medium is a -2 to hit, long range is a -5 to hit. And like I said before, they expand the weapon list and the armor list, as well as the inclusion of fighting styles as well for different types of weapons. But we'll get to that later on. And the last little thing in the equipment chapter is encumbrance. And they give you this fucking chart. You can use encumbrance if you want, but I personally don't bother with it. Fucking yeesh, dude, look at this thing. Couple more interesting charts. Stowage capacity for various containers and the carrying capacity of different animals. So that's pretty helpful. Alright, we're just going to skip all the way over to the combat chapter. So, you have your Thaco advancement chart here that we went over previously, and the different class groups. Or, if you don't feel like doing that, here's just the already calculated Thaco's chart. Make it easy for you. Let's see. It would probably be good to stop off at the saving throw area. So saving throws are a little different. As you can see, they are also separated into the different class types. Then they are separated once more into what type of attack it is. So, as you can see, as your character levels up, the DC, as you might know it as, for your saving throw, decreases, so they're easier to obtain. So let's take a look at them. Saving throw priority. Sometimes the type of saving throw required by a situation or item isn't clear, or more than one category of saving throw may seem appropriate. For this reason, the saving throw categories are listed in order of importance, beginning with paralyzation, poison, death magic, and ending with spells. Imagine that Wrath, there's Wrath, is struck by the ray from a wand of polymorphing. Both a saving throw versus wands and a saving throw versus polymorph would be appropriate, but Wrath must roll a saving throw versus wands, because that category has a higher priority than polymorph. The categories of saving throws are as follows. Paralyzation, poison, and death magic. This is used whenever a character is affected by a paralyzing attack, regardless of source, poison, regardless of strength, or certain spells and magical items that otherwise kill the player outright, as listed in their descriptions. This saving throw can also be used in situations in which exceptional force of will or physical fortitude are needed. Rod, staff, or wand. As its name implies, this is used whenever a character is affected by the powers of a rod, staff, or wand, provided another save of higher priority isn't called for. This saving throw is sometimes specified for situations in which a character faces a magical attack from an unusual source. Petrification or polymorph. This is used anytime a character is turned to stone, or polymorphed by a monster, spell, or magical item, other than a wand. It can also be used when the character must withstand some massive physical alteration of his entire body. Breath weapon. A character uses this save when facing monsters with breath weapons, particularly the powerful blast of a dragon. This save can also be used in situations where a combination of physical stamina and dexterity are critical favors in survival. This save can also be used in situations where a combination of physical stamina and dexterity are critical factors in survival. Spell. This is used whenever a character attempts to resist the effects of a magical attack, either by a spellcaster or from a magical item, provided no other type of saving throw is specified. This save can also be used to resist an attack that defies any other classification. So yeah, there you go. That's how saving throws work. And then there's another section here about ability checks as saving throws, which is what they would later become in 5th. When a character attempts to avoid danger through the use of one of his abilities, an ability check can be used in lieu of a saving throw. For example, Ragnar the Thief has broken into someone's home when he hears a grating noise from the ceiling above. He looks up to find a 5-ton block of the ceiling headed straight for him. He's going to need speedy reactions to get out of the way, so a dexterity ability check should be rolled to see if he avoids the trap. And then they have plenty of other modifiers and whatnot. You have your turning undead ability for your clerics. As you can see, it is still based off of hit die. It is a chance to turn the undead instead. As you can see, at level 1, if you roll a 10 or higher, you can turn skeletons. And the amount is 2d6 of these creatures. And as you advance in level, you will begin to automatically turn some of the lower ranking undead creatures. And whenever you have a D, you will automatically destroy these creatures. So, for example, a level 7 cleric will absolutely destroy skeletons or zombies. 2d6 of them at least. And paladins turn undead as priests of 2 levels lower. Alrighty. Let's talk about taking damage. Here's a pretty important section. Energy drain. This is a feature of powerful undead, and particularly nasty monsters. This energy drain is a particularly horrible power, since it causes the loss of one or more experience levels. Yes, you can have your levels drained. When a character is hit by an energy-draining creature, he suffers normal damage from the attack. In addition, the character loses one or more levels, and thus hit dice and hit points. For each level lost, roll the hit dice appropriate to the character's level, and subtract that number of hit points from the character's total, and constitution when appropriate. If the levels lost was one in which the character received a set number of hit points rather than the die roll, subtract the appropriate number of hit points. The character's experience points drop to halfway between the minimum needed for his new level and the minimum needed for the next level above his new level. Multi-class and dual-class characters lose their highest level first. If you're a wizard and you get drained and you lose access to certain spell slots, you lose those spells. They are gone. If you're drained to level 0, you become an NPC. If you are drained to below 0 levels, you return as an undead of the same type in 2d4 days, and you automatically become an NPC at the DM. So, that fucking sucks. It sucks just as much as you think it does. But yeah, certain undead are like vampires, nasty in second. You do not want to mess with them. Here's another good section. Healing. Specifically, we'll go to natural healing. Characters heal naturally at a rate of 1 hit point per day of rest. Rest is defined as low activity. Nothing more strenuous than riding a horse or traveling from one place to another. Fighting, running in fear, lifting a heavy boulder, or any other physical activity prevents resting, since it strains old wounds and may even reopen them. Yeah. If a character has complete bed rest, doing nothing for an entire day, he can regain 3 hit points for that day. For each complete week of bed rest, the character can add any constitution hit point bonus he might have to the base of 21 points, 3 points per day. Now that's also kind of wonky because then they go into the Faerun calendar of having 10 days in a week, but you get the idea. In both cases above, the character is assumed to be getting adequate food, water, and sleep. If these are lacking, the character does not regain any hit points that day. So yeah, so you got 45 hit points, for example, as a fighter, and you just take an absolute beating. Say you lose your healer, and you barely make it back to town. Yeah, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be sleeping that off for quite some time, or until you find some more magical healing. Yeah, the non-magical healing in this edition is realistic, for better or for worse. Raising the dead. Curative and healing spells have no effect on a dead character. He can only be returned to life with a raise dead or a resurrection spell, or a device that accomplishes one of these effects. Each time a character is returned to life, the player must make a resurrection survival roll based on his current constitution. If the die roll is successful, the character is restored to life in whatever condition is specified by the spell or device. A character restored to life in this way has his constitution permanently lowered by 1 point. This can affect hit points previously earned. Should the character's constitution bonus go down, the character's hit points total is reduced by the appropriate number of hit points. When the character's constitution drops to 0, that character can no longer be raised. He is permanently removed from play. So, every time you die, your constitution lowers, and therefore it gets harder to roll that resurrection survival. And what this means is that you're mortal. And I think that's a pretty big aspect of second in comparison to at least fifth. You can only come back so many times. At some point, you will fail that resurrection roll, and you will be gone. It makes you not take your character's life for granted, even if you do have a cleric who can cast Raise Dead willy-nilly. Eventually, it's not going to work anymore. and whatever god you may or may not believe in will take you wherever you're supposed to go. A lot of these later chapters we can really just kind of skim through. A couple of important things of note. You got a handy-dandy little chart concerning visibility ranges. This is measured in yards, by the way. And then you have another handy-dandy little chart about light sources and the radius of light they give off and their burning time. So, that's pretty useful. You have your time and movement. You have your base movement rates for your PHB races. All the little guys move at 6, and everyone else moves at 12. Something to note, dwarves are medium, but they still move at 6. They're short, but they are rotund. And the last part I want to mention on the player's handbook is the spells. So, as you can see, they are separated into wizard and priest. Wizards go up to 9th level spells, and priests go up to 7th level. So, I'm not going to go over every single spell in the book, because, once again, that would take forever. I will mention a few that I think you might find interesting. We have Cantrip. Now, Cantrip is a 1st level spell, but it's also not. In the original player's handbook, they sort of make it seem like a general purpose 1st level spell with a bunch of uses. In later books, like the Complete Wizard's Handbook and the Tome of Magic and whatnot, they expand on Cantrip to make it a little more how you might know it. Instead, you're able to substitute a 1st level spell slot for a certain number of cantrip slots based off of your level. So yeah. Charm Person. So Charm Person is interesting because of its duration. Its duration lasts based off of your opponent's intelligence. So as you can see here, if they are 3 or less intelligence, you will have them charmed for 3 months. They will not make another check for 3 months. Even at average intelligence, 10 to 12, 3 weeks is, it's a little overkill if you ask me. I'll go ahead and mention Magic Missile because it's Magic Missile. So, it does a d4 plus 1 points of damage per missile that you shoot. And the number of missiles that you shoot is 1 for every odd level of your character. So, if you're level 1, you shoot 1 missile. Level 3, you get 2. 5, you get 3. And so on until you hit level 9, and it maxes out at 5 missiles. Something to explain at this point is that for all of your spells, there is no upcasting. Your spells are cast at a power level given from your character's level. So, whenever I said that you can shoot 5 missiles at level 9, you can shoot 5 missiles, and it still counts as a 1st level spell slot. Similar to Fireball and Lightning Bolt, you get more dice of damage as you level up, specifically 1d6 per level in this one, up to level 10. And it's still a 3rd level spell slot, but you'll do 10d6 damage. So that's kind of what I meant when I said wizards are really glass cannons in this one. Or glass railguns. Another interesting one is Hold Person. Now, Hold Person affects a d4 creatures, and they do not receive a saving throw each round to break out of it. They are held for the entirety of the spell duration, which is 2 rounds per level. So you are stuck if you fail your saving throw on this one. It can be pretty nasty. Stone Skin. So Stone Skin, you cast it on yourself or an ally, and you receive a number of stone skins, which is equal to a d4 plus half your level rounded down. So for example, if you're a 7th level mage, you get a d4 plus 3. And what that does is it blocks a certain number of attacks. So you just ignored that many attacks until you run out of stone skins. It's not a decrease in damage taken. You just kind of say, fuck you. It's pretty much an auto-include for any of your BBEGs, to be honest. It does not, however, block magical damage. So if you get hit by a magic missile or a fireball, that damage is just going to go straight through. You want to hear about a fucking ludicrous spell? Let's talk about Prismatic Sphere. This spell enables the wizard to conjure up an immobile, opaque globe of shimmering, multicolored light to surround him, giving protection from all forms of attack. The sphere flashes in all colors of the visible spectrum, 7 of which have distinct powers and purposes. Any creature with fewer than 8 hit dice is blinded for 2d4 turns by the colors of the sphere. Only the spellcaster can pass in and out of the prismatic sphere without harm, though he can cast it over others to protect them. The sphere can be destroyed color by color in consecutive order by various magical effects. However, the first must be brought down before the second one can be affected, and so on. Any creature passing through the barrier receives the effect of every color still remaining. The following table shows the colors and effects of the prismatic sphere, as well as what will negate each globe. If you try to walk through this, here's what happens to you. 20 points of damage, save versus half. 40 points of damage, save versus half. 80 points of damage, save versus half. Save or die versus poison, and 20 points if you make it. Save versus petrification. Save versus wand or go insane. Save versus spell or be sent to another plane. The spells can get pretty fucking bonkers at higher levels. Yeah, this is what I mean when wizards can do some horrendous shit. I'm surprised Power Word Scrunch isn't in here. Alrighty. So, some things about priest spells. Cure Wounds being the first one. So as I said before, you don't upscale your casting in 2nd edition. So each cure spell is at a different level and has a different name. So at 1st level, you have Cure Light Wounds. It's 1d8 hit points. In the Tome of Magic, which is an expansion on spells, they have Cure Moderate Wounds, which is a d10 plus 1. At 4th level, you have Cure Serious Wounds at 2d8. And then at 5th, you have Cure Critical Wounds at 3d8 plus 3. So as you can see, even with the magical healing, it is still a bit less than what you might be used to. Unless you have Heal at 6th level, which is all your hit points back. At that point, you would need an 11th level Cleric, which are not too common to come by. Some other interesting spells. We're going to jump right over to 7th level. Why not? So, let's start off with Regenerate. It lets you grow back lost limbs. Pretty expected. However, I will take the time to explain reversing spells. Now, some spells are reversible, and that usually gives them a completely opposite effect of what they usually do. Certain priests of certain gods get access to certain spells in their reversed form. So let's take a look at it. The reverse, Wither, causes the member or organ touched to shrivel and cease functioning in 1 round, dropping off into dust in 2d4 turns. Also, I would like to point out, a round is 1 minute in 2nd edition, which I believe is the same in 5th. However, turn is a different meaning. Turn is 10 rounds, which is 10 minutes. But yeah, as you can see, priests, while usually having less damaging spells. They still have great effects on some of their spells. We have Resurrection, which is similar to 5th edition. However, you do still have to worry about that Resurrection survival check and losing 1 point of con. Like I said, at some point, you're going to the afterlife. You're not coming back. Restoration. Restoration is a fix for whenever you eventually get level drained by some horrendous undead creature. But yeah, and that one's also reversible. Energy Drain, which you can suck out a life energy from someone you touch. Needless to say, the reverse is a very evil act. Usually only priests of evil deities are able to do that one, but they can do it. Let's see, the last one I want to talk about is Reincarnation. Now, Reincarnation's a fun one. There's 2 different versions of it, actually. There's one for priests and one for wizards. The priest version reincarnates you into, well, I'll let you look at the chart. Yeah. Also, something to note is whenever you come back through reincarnation, you're rolling brand new stats, so you don't have to worry about that -1 con. However, you do come back at half your previous level, which is a bit of a bummer, but that's the price you pay for avoiding death. If you come back as a race that can't be your previous class, you start over at level 1. So yeah, death has its price. And here's the wizard version of reincarnation. And they also expand on this more in the Humanoid's Handbook, adding more races and giving you rules for playing some of the non-playable races on this chart. Except for Troll. Troll is just on there. They just let you play as a troll. So, that about covers the real meat of the Player's Handbook for 2nd edition, and covers the introduction to the edition. Even if it doesn't sound like your cup of tea, I hope you at least gained some insight into the roots of the game, and perhaps picked up a few things you might want to put into your game. Next, I will most likely cover the DMG, or if anyone wants, I'll start on the class-specific books, or even the race books. There's just plenty of content to get to. I will get around to all of it. It'll just take some time. I don't have the budget for an outro, so I guess I'm just gonna end the video there. Should have got some water for this. Man, it's dry. I'm dying.